One of the ways that we can study attachment and attachment differences is sometimes by accident. What you have pictured here in this particular picture is a Romanian I'm searching for a word, hang on here a second, the Romanian orphanage where kids were cared for. And what happened in this orphanage would be that you would have one caregiver to like 50 kids. So the kids wouldn't be cared for, and we began to notice changes in kids or basic characteristics of kids who were not cared for on a consistent basis. Short of instances like this, we can create what we refer to as a strange situation. Mary Ainsworth is a theorist who worked with a guy by the name of John Bowlby, I should say. Ainsworth and John Bowlby. And John Bowlby is probably best known for some of his work in terms of attachment as it applies or has been applied to grief and loss and pining behavior and so forth. But Mary Ainsworth developed something that she referred to as a strange situation, and by doing so, they would take kids and put them, test out various situations and watch kids react to them in a playroom. And what she found as she would vary this situation, sometimes parents would stay, sometimes parents would leave, and she would watch what kids actually do. And she determined that there were different styles of attachment that were indicative of how parents parented and of kids themselves. And so what it turned out to be is the first one was something she referred to as secure attachment. And if you're ever in a waiting room and you see a mom waiting for an appointment, maybe you're going to the doctor and there's a mom there with a little one, and the securely attached kid feels free to explore because they trust the caregiver to be there when they come back. And a lot of times when they explore, they go out into the environment, maybe the waiting room, and then they go rushing back to mom, touch base, go back again, and do those kinds of things. And they played comfortably in their mom's presence. They were distressed when she leaves. They sought contact when mom came back. They're all part of secure attachment. A second style of attachment that came up was a kid that we oftentimes refer to as insecurely attached. And insecurely attached kids look as if they are hedging their bets against the caregiver leaving. And so they are oftentimes very clingy. I used to work in a community mental health center with kids that came from abusive and neglected backgrounds, and a lot of them were insecurely attached. They looked they looked like if they could unzip their parent and climb in, they would. They would not leave their side because they weren't going to risk the opportunity of the parent to leave them behind, and they didn't really trust them. A third one, which was later added, and this isn't necessarily in your book, is the anxiously attached kid. And this one was discovered a little bit later, where the child sometimes would be act like they were securely attached, and other times look like they were insecurely attached. And when a parent came back, oftentimes they would not hold their hands out, but it would be as if they were punishing their parent during that time. Now, the key thing here is the idea of basic trust, and it comes up particularly when we look at Erik Erikson, which we talked about earlier, where the child has a basic trust of the caregiver. Children that grow up in environments like this Romanian orphanage, they had no trust of their caregiver because they couldn't count on them being able to come when they needed them the most. And this key component is part of the whole idea behind attachment and how they actually operate. The other thing has to be mentioned in this is what happens during abuse and neglect. And I've already talked a little bit about this because oftentimes we spend all of our attention looking at the overt abuse, but we forget about the absence of attention, which is part of the neglect. And what happens with kids is that they develop this withdrawn kind of style, social style. They oftentimes are subject to a fair amount of anxiety. Sometimes they're even mute or speechless because of abuse and neglect. And kids may at times become very resilient, and I can tell you from having worked with kids or worked with people who have come out of abusive environments, they can take a lot of punishment, if you want to put it that way, because of the environment they came from. But in spite of that, they tend to be very hypervigilant as well, and so they are scanning their environment for any sign of danger. And so they do that because they've lived in such a unpredictable environment.